The room was alive with laughter, the soft glow of fairy lights reflecting off crystal glasses. Everyone seemed lost in their own celebrations, the warmth of the Christmas lights giving the illusion of safety and comfort. But she felt invisible, out of place, a quiet observer among the glittering crowd. And then it happened, a brush against her arm, a small collision, but it made her stumble, and her drink nearly tipped. She looked up, flustered, ready to apologize. He was there, dark eyes that seemed to pierce straight through her, sharp, commanding, dangerous. Not a hint of amusement, just a predator assessing his prey. The kind of gaze that could see your secrets before you even spoke them, that could sense fear and desire tangled together. Her breath caught, her pulse racing, and she realized, with sudden clarity, that nothing in her quiet life had prepared her for this. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely audible. Her words trembled, betraying the storm of emotions inside her. "Watch where you're going," he said. His voice was low, controlled, almost hypnotic. There was no anger, only an icy, unreadable authority that made her knees weak. He didn't move away. He didn't let go. He just stared, as if he had the power to hold her in place without touching her. She tried to step back, to retreat into the crowd, but the world seemed to shrink around him. Everyone else faded into the blur of lights and laughter. All that mattered was him, the dangerous calm he exuded, and the sudden inexplicable pull she felt toward him. He tilted his head slightly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Not mocking, but knowing. Warning or a promise? She couldn't tell. Something inside him stirred too. Something long buried. Her innocence, her vulnerability, the way she didn't seem to belong in this glittering, careless world. It called to him. He didn't usually notice people. He didn't usually care. But this accidental collision was different. It ignited something he didn't recognize in himself. Something he hadn't allowed anyone to see in years. For a heartbeat, the noise of the party disappeared. Her fear, her fascination, the faint trembling of her hands, he observed it all with a predator's precision, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of admiration. Then the moment passed. He stepped aside, letting her slip away. But not before his eyes met hers one last time. A silent promise lingered between them, unspoken but heavy with meaning. She was safe, for now. But the air had shifted. Fate had intervened in the form of a brush, against an arm, and she didn't know it yet. But nothing would ever be the same. This was no ordinary Christmas party. This was the night her life tilted, ever so slightly, toward danger, toward obsession, toward a man who didn't just want her, but needed her. And as she moved into the crowd, glancing back only once, the faintest trace of a shiver ran down her spine. She couldn't understand why. But the universe, it seemed, had already begun, writing a story in which she was at the center, and he was the storm. The party glittered around her, laughter echoing against the high ceilings, glasses clinking, music weaving through the crowd like silk. She tried to blend in, to disappear among the revelers, but she couldn't shake the memory of him. That piercing gaze, that smirk that felt like a challenge and a promise all at once. She didn't know his name. She didn't know the power he wielded, the danger that seemed to follow him like a shadow. All she knew was that the accidental bump had left her breathless, heart-pounding and strangely intrigued. From across the room she noticed whispers, people leaning close to one another, casting glances in his direction. She didn't understand, but she felt the undercurrent of something dark, something potent. And then she saw him, not just watching, but observing, like a hawk circling its prey. Only it wasn't fear in his eyes this time. It was curiosity, interest, possession. A part of her wanted to flee, to escape the intensity of his stare. Another part couldn't look away. She felt pulled into a current far stronger than herself, a force that she both feared and craved. He moved with a predator's grace, threading through the party with casual power. Everyone stepped aside without thinking. No one dared to get in his way. And yet, when he reached her, it wasn't confrontation he offered. It was acknowledgement, recognition. "You don't belong here," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. Not accusing, not cruel, but undeniable. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her trembling hands. I just came with a friend," she murmured. "Friend?" His brow arched, a faint edge of amusement in his voice. "Alone, or—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The unspoken question hung between them like smoke, thick and suffocating. For the first time, she noticed the subtle details. The tailored black suit that hinted at power, the way his broad shoulders dominated space, the dangerous calm in every movement. He was danger wrapped in elegance, a storm waiting to break. She wanted to look away, to tell herself she was imagining it. But the weight of his gaze held her, in place. And beneath it, something else. Something raw. Something that made her heart ache and her instincts scream in equal measure. Then, as if noticing something, his eyes narrowed slightly. A guest had gotten too close, laughing too loudly, reaching for a drink that wasn't theirs. He moved without hesitation, an aura of command emanating from him. The room seemed to bend around his presence. The stranger froze, stepping back, clearly sensing the power he was up against. Her breath caught. Protection, danger, obsession, they all mingled in that one quiet moment. She realized with a shiver that this man controlled the world around him effortlessly. And somehow, she was already part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. As he returned his attention to her, the faintest trace of a smile brushed his lips. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it left a lingering heat in her chest. He wasn't just watching her. He was studying her, learning her, claiming her. And she, in that moment, understood. Nothing about this night would be ordinary. She had glimpsed the danger, and she was already drawn into it. The party continued around them, oblivious. But for her, time had slowed. The air between them was charged, electric, impossible to ignore. And in the corner of her mind, a warning whispered, a warning she couldn't quite listen to, because she was already hooked. She tried to convince herself it was just a party, just a coincidence. That bump, those eyes, they didn't mean anything. But she couldn't stop feeling watched. Every time she glanced toward the center of the room, there he was, standing tall, calm, commanding, like he owned not just the party, but the entire city. And in a way, he did. She wasn't alone when she finally found a quiet corner, hoping to catch her breath. But before she could even think of relief, he appeared. No footsteps, no announcement, just there. Close, enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Close enough that the faint scent of expensive cologne made her dizzy. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked softly, a tone that was polite on the surface but carried an unspoken edge. His eyes, dark and endless, didn't just look at her. They measured her, assessed her, dissected her. She swallowed hard, her words caught somewhere between fear and fascination. I'm fine. Thank you." His gaze didn't waver. "You shouldn't be here," he said. A statement, not a question. It wasn't. Just a warning. It was a silent command. The kind of words that felt like steel, cold and unyielding, curling around her chest and squeezing just enough to make her pulse quicken. I just came with a friend," she murmured, feeling smaller than ever. Yet, in spite of the fear, something inside her stirred. A strange, undeniable attraction. His presence was dangerous, yes, but it was also magnetic, irresistible. "You don't belong in my world," he said, stepping closer, his movement so controlled it felt almost predatory. Every inch of space he claimed drew her into his orbit, and she felt the pull, helpless to resist. Her heart hammered as she realized just how different their worlds were. She, with her quiet, ordinary life. He, with power that dripped from his very being, untouchable, feared. And yet, fate had collided them, forcing them into the same space, into the same charged air that crackled between them like a storm about to break. He tilted his head slightly, studying her, silent now, letting the tension linger. There was no threat in his words anymore. It was in his stillness, in the way he could make her feel both seen and cornered, without ever raising his voice. "You should leave," he finally said, softer this time, but no less commanding. The words weren't just advice. They were a test, a silent challenge. Would she run, as anyone sane would, or would she stay, drawn to a danger she didn't understand? And she stayed, because something about him was impossible to ignore. Something in the curve of his jaw, the intensity of his stare, the subtle promise of control and obsession made her feel alive in a way nothing else ever had. The world continued around them, people laughing, glasses clinking, oblivious to the tension that had tightened like a wire between them. For a moment, it was just the two of them, locked in a quiet battlefield of desire and fear. Then he stepped back, just enough to remind her of boundaries, but only just. His eyes lingered, dark and unreadable, leaving her with a quiet warning and an unspoken promise. She didn't know what he was thinking. She didn't know what he wanted. But she knew one thing. This silent threat, this calm, controlled power, was more intoxicating than she could have imagined, and she was already dangerously drawn to it. She was trying to blend in again, hiding in the shadows of the party, when a sudden commotion drew her attention. A man, clearly drunk and reckless, was harassing a group of guests. His hand brushed hers, too close, too forceful, and she recoiled instinctively. Before she could even react, he was there, the Mafia boss, calm, silent, like a shadow moving through the crowd. His eyes dark and stormy, fixed on the man who dared to cross her path. There was no hesitation, no mercy, just a quiet, deadly force that seemed to emanate from his very being. "Step away," he said, his voice low but commanding. The words didn't just ask, they demanded. The drunk man froze, the bravado draining from his face as he realized the weight of authority pressing down on him. She watched, heart pounding as he approached the man. Not with anger, not with a fight, but with a presence that left no room for resistance. He didn't need to touch him. The aura of control, of danger, was enough. The man stumbled back, muttering apologies he didn't mean, and fled into the crowd. She couldn't breathe. The sudden surge of adrenaline left her trembling, but she was also captivated. He hadn't just saved her. He had claimed the space around her, wrapped it in an invisible shield that was entirely his. She could feel it, even from a few steps away, and the pull of it was intoxicating. He turned to her, expression unreadable. His dark eyes scanned her quickly, making sure she was unharmed, that she hadn't been scared too badly. And for a brief moment, the predator softened just a fraction, a hint that he cared, or at least that he acknowledged her existence. "You should leave," he murmured again, almost a whisper, but the edge in his tone remained. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a statement of fact, a subtle claim. Her voice caught in her throat. I'm fine," she stammered, unsure if she was thanking him or simply trying to steady herself. He stepped closer, the crowd fading around them. "Not everyone can protect themselves in this world," he said quietly, his gaze never leaving hers. "But I can." The words sent a shiver down her spine. Not because they were comforting, but because they hinted at something darker, something dangerous. She realized that he wasn't just a man of power. He was a man who could consume her life entirely, if he wanted to. And somehow, she felt drawn to it. The party carried on, oblivious. Laughter and music filled the air, but she felt like she was in a bubble, isolated by the sheer force of his presence. The moment passed, but the tension lingered, thick and suffocating. He finally moved away, slipping back into the crowd, leaving her heart hammering and her thoughts spinning. She couldn't stop replaying it. The control, the danger, the way he had protected her without asking, without needing to. It was possessive and thrilling all at once. Before she could even react, he was there. The Mafia boss. Calm. Silent. Like a shadow moving through the crowd. His eyes dark and stormy, fixed on the man who dared to cross her path. There was no hesitation, no mercy. Just a quiet, deadly force that seemed to emanate from his very being. "Step away," he said, his voice low but commanding. The words didn't just ask, they demanded. The drunk man froze, the bravado draining from his face as he realized the weight of authority pressing down on him. She watched, heart pounding as he approached the man. Not with anger, not with a fight, but with a presence that left no room for resistance. He didn't need to touch him. The aura of control, of danger, was enough. The man stumbled back, muttering apologies he didn't mean, and fled into the crowd. She couldn't breathe. The sudden surge of adrenaline left her trembling, but she was also captivated. He hadn't just saved her. He had claimed the space around her, wrapped it in an invisible shield that was entirely his. She could feel it, even from a few steps away, and the pull of it was intoxicating. He turned to her, expression unreadable. His dark eyes scanned her quickly, making sure she was unharmed, that she hadn't been scared too badly, and for a brief moment the predator softened just a fraction, a hint that he cared, or at least that he acknowledged her existence. "You should leave," he murmured again, almost a whisper, but the edge in his tone remained. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a statement of fact, a subtle claim. Her voice caught in her throat. I'm fine," she stammered, unsure if she was thanking him or simply trying to steady herself. He stepped closer, the crowd fading around them. "Not everyone can protect themselves in this world," he said quietly, his gaze never leaving hers. "But I can." The words sent a shiver down her spine. Not because they were comforting, but because they hinted at something darker, something dangerous. She realized that he wasn't just a man of power. He was a man who could consume her life entirely, if he wanted to. And somehow, she felt drawn to it. The party carried on, oblivious. Laughter and music filled the air, but she felt like she was in a bubble, isolated by the sheer force of his presence. The moment passed, but the tension lingered thick and suffocating. He finally moved away, slipping back into the crowd, leaving her heart hammering and her thoughts spinning. She couldn't stop replaying it. The control, the danger, the way he had protected her without asking, without needing to. It was possessive and thrilling all at once. For the first time, she realized something terrifying. She didn't just feel safe around him. She felt claimed, like a puzzle piece that had been missing from his dangerous world. And even though she barely knew him, even though she didn't understand the rules of the game she'd stepped into, she couldn't ignore the truth. He was no ordinary man, and now she was already trapped. Not in chains, not physically, but in the pull of him, in the dangerous obsession that was beginning to form around her. The Christmas lights glittered overhead, soft and warm, but they couldn't compete with the storm that had just entered her life. And she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The music shifted, soft and slow, a velvet ribbon of sound weaving through the warm glow of the Christmas lights. Couples moved across the dance floor, swaying in time, lost in their own worlds. She felt a nervous tug in her chest, hoping to stay invisible. But she knew, even before he appeared, that he would find her. He did. Not with a loud entrance or a crowd around him. Just there, standing beside her as if he had always been, his presence so commanding that the air itself seemed to bend toward him. He extended a hand, not demanding but impossible to refuse. "You dance?" he asked, low and measured, a question loaded with more than curiosity. Her pulse jumped. She hesitated, her mind screaming for caution, for retreat. And yet, the pull. It was magnetic. His dark eyes locked onto hers, patient and intense, and she found herself, slipping her hand into his. The world faded. The laughter, the chatter, the sparkling lights. It all disappeared as he drew her close. His hand was firm at the small of her back, guiding her with a precision that was both protective and possessive. She could feel his strength, the subtle heat radiating from him, and it made her shiver. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured against her ear. Not loud, not harsh, just a whisper that made her heart stutter. The words weren't a warning anymore. They were a reminder, a claim. She wanted to pull back, to run, to breathe again. But his presence anchored her. The closeness was intoxicating, dangerous, forbidden. Her pulse pounded in her ears as their bodies moved in sync, and for the first time, she understood what it meant to be caught between fear and desire. He didn't speak much, but each glance, each subtle brush of fingers was a conversation she couldn't ignore. His hand on her back was not just guidance. It was a promise, a silent assertion that she belonged to the world he controlled, whether she wanted to or not. Her thoughts spiraled. Who was he? Why did he seem to know her without knowing her? And why? Despite every instinct screaming at her to flee, did she feel safe, exhilarated, alive? Around them, the party went on, oblivious. Music, laughter, clinking glasses. But for them, time had slowed. Each second stretched, heavy with tension and unspoken words. He leaned in, slightly, just enough that the warmth of his presence pressed against her, and she could almost feel the dangerous promise in his touch. "You're trembling," he said softly, as if noticing the truth she tried to hide. "I'm fine," she whispered, though the quiver in her voice betrayed her. He didn't push, didn't comment further. He simply held her, guiding her across the floor, letting the intimacy speak for itself. Every subtle movement, every quiet glance was charged with the forbidden. It was a dance not just of bodies, but of power and desire, of danger and obsession, intertwining. When the song ended, he released her hand slowly, just enough to let her regain composure, but not enough to break the connection. His gaze lingered, unreadable, as if marking her, claiming her without a single word, and she knew. She knew that nothing about this night, about this man, was ordinary. She had danced with danger, with power, with obsession, and she wanted more, even as she feared it. The lights twinkled above, soft and deceptive, but the heat between them was real. And it was, only growing. She tried to steady her racing heart, lingering near the edge of the party, pretending to be just another guest. But the world felt different now. The brush of his hand, the heat of his gaze. They had left marks she couldn't see but could feel. Marks that whispered of danger and desire, of control and obsession, and then she heard it. Soft murmurs, almost drowned out by the music and laughter, but impossible to ignore. Names, stories, rumors, words like knives slicing through the veil of normalcy. He's untouchable. No, one crosses him and lives to tell the tale. He doesn't just take, he claims, her stomach twisted. The man she had danced with, who had protected her with nothing more than a look, was not just powerful. He was feared, legendary, in a way that made her blood run cold and her heart thrum faster at the same time. A part of her wanted to run, to escape, to disappear into the crowd and forget she had ever seen him. But curiosity, that dangerous, relentless curiosity, kept her rooted in place. She wanted to know. She needed to know. And then he appeared again, always at the periphery, always watching. She realized she couldn't shake him. He was everywhere, yet nowhere. A shadow that followed her without leaving a trace. She tried to focus on anything else, on the twinkling lights, the soft music, the chatter of other guests. But her mind kept returning to him, to the quiet power he radiated, to the mystery that surrounded him like a cloak, and to the dark thrill that whispered, "He is dangerous." And yet, irresistible. Her gaze accidentally met his across the room, and for a heartbeat, the party disappeared. Thus, whispers, the lights, the laughter, all faded into the background. There was only him, standing, there like a storm contained in human form, and her, drawn toward it despite herself. A chill ran down her spine. She wasn't sure if it was fear or anticipation, maybe both. The whispers from earlier returned, but now they carried new weight. Friends, colleagues, strangers, all speaking in hushed tones about his obsessions, his power, his control over those he chose. She realized with a shiver that she had already become part of that story. Even without knowing it, even without understanding how deeply she was entangled, she had drawn his attention in a way that could not be undone. And yet, she couldn't stop herself from stealing glances at him. Each glance was a risk. Each glance was a pull. Each glance reminded her of the dangerous line she had crossed simply by being in his presence. He noticed her watching, of course. He always noticed. The faintest smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, subtle, almost casual, but laden with meaning. It was not just a look. It was a statement, a claim, a promise. And in that moment, she realized that she was no longer merely a bystander in this world. She was being drawn in, step by step, whisper by whisper, into a darkness she didn't yet understand. A darkness that was thrilling, terrifying, and completely irresistible. The party carried on around them, oblivious. But for her, nothing was ordinary anymore. Every glance, every movement, every whispered secret reminded her. This man, the Mafia boss she barely knew, had already begun to define her world, and she knew deep down that the night was far from over. The whispers, the secrets, they were just the beginning. The laughter and music of the Christmas party felt distant now, muffled, as if she were in another world. She slipped away from the crowd, searching for a quiet corner, a moment to catch her racing thoughts. But she wasn't alone. He was there, not in the main room, not among the glittering guests, just there, in the shadows of a hallway, leaning casually against the wall, dark eyes catching hers the instant she appeared. The dim light painted his sharp features in stark contrast, and the sight of him made her pulse spike. "You're avoiding the party," he said softly, almost teasing. But the undertone was unmistakable. Possession, interest, an edge of danger she couldn't ignore. I needed some air," she whispered, unsure if her voice was steady enough to hide the tremor of nerves. He didn't move closer, not immediately. Instead, he studied her, slow, deliberate, like a hunter, observing a rare, fragile prey. "Do you always walk alone?" His voice was calm, controlled, but every word carried weight, a quiet threat, wrapped in silk. She swallowed, heart hammering. "Sometimes," she said, her voice barely audible. Her eyes darted around the hallway, but there was nowhere to hide. And deep down, she knew she didn't want to. He stepped closer then, just enough that the heat of him brushed against her without touching. His proximity was intoxicating, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, the words carrying a promise as much as a warning. "Not with your kind of vulnerability." She shivered, though she didn't know if it was from fear, anticipation, or something else entirely. His gaze burned into hers. pulling her into a current she didn't understand but couldn't resist. Every instinct screamed to step back, to flee. But every ounce of herself wanted to stay, to see what this man, this storm of a man, would do next. I don't even know you, she said, trying to assert herself, to remind herself of the distance that should exist between them. He tilted his head slightly, a smirk brushing his lips. You will, he said, low and deliberate. Soon enough. The words weren't a threat, not exactly, but they carried the weight of inevitability. The kind that leaves you breathless and trembling. The hallway felt smaller, tighter, every inch of space between them charged with unspoken tension. The air was thick, heavy, alive with a dangerous allure. She could feel his presence like a magnet, pulling her toward a world she didn't understand, toward a man who could consume her life without a word, and yet she didn't pull away. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. The faintest flicker of a smile appeared on his lips, subtle, unreadable, but enough to make her heart leap. It was acknowledgement, recognition, fascination. Careful, he whispered, just close enough that she felt the heat of his words on her skin. One misstep, and you might find yourself lost. She didn't know whether to be terrified or thrilled, perhaps both. As he stepped back, retreating into the shadows, she realized something terrifying and exhilarating. She was already caught, already drawn into his orbit, already a part of a dangerous game she hadn't agreed to play yet couldn't resist, and the truth settled over her like a cold fire. This shadowed encounter wasn't just a meeting. It was the beginning of an obsession. His, hers, both. The party continued behind the closed doors, oblivious. But for her, the world had changed. The danger, the fascination, the undeniable pull of him, it had begun, and nothing, she knew, would ever be the same. The party's laughter and music felt like a distant echo now, as though it belonged to someone else's life entirely. She lingered near the grand windows, trying to gather her thoughts, heart still pounding from the hallway encounter. Every instinct screamed that he was dangerous. Every beat of her heart whispered the same forbidden fascination. She couldn't look away, and then he appeared again. Not with the usual dominance, not with the cold precision that made people fear him. This time, there was something different, something almost human. He stood across the room, leaning against the balcony railing, eyes dark but distant, as if carrying a weight too heavy for words. For the first time, he seemed real, vulnerable in a way. That was rare, almost impossible. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach, unsure if she even wanted to see the man behind the storm. But something in her, a quiet courage, a spark she didn't know she had, drew her closer. You're still here, he said softly, noticing her. His voice lacked the usual control, the calm, authority. There was a flicker of something, regret perhaps, or longing, that made her pause. I wanted some air, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. It's crowded. He nodded, and for a brief moment the steel in his eyes softened. It's difficult, he murmured almost to himself, to trust, to let anyone in. Her chest tightened. The words were so different from the powerful, commanding man she had seen all night. For a second she glimpsed the walls he had built around himself. Walls of fear, of control, of obsession that were as much a prison as a shield. You're not like them, she whispered, unsure why the words slipped out. You're human. He looked at her then, really looked, and the intensity of his gaze softened just a fraction. A hint of something raw, fragile, hidden beneath the dark, dangerous exterior. Most don't see it, he said quietly. And those who do, they leave. She felt a pang in her chest, The realization struck her. He was lonely. Not the kind of lonely that comes from isolation, but the kind that comes from being untouchable, feared, desired, and misunderstood all at once. The air between them thickened with unspoken understanding. Danger and desire, power and vulnerability, all tangled together. And for the first time she wondered, was this man as untouchable as everyone whispered? Or was he just as human as she was, hidden behind a carefully constructed mask? He stepped closer, not aggressively, not possessively, but with a subtle intensity that made her stomach flutter. "You shouldn't see this side of me," he murmured. "It makes complications." "I don't care," she said softly, surprising herself with the honesty in her voice. "I want to know you, even this side." His lips curved into a fleeting smile, one that was rare, private, and impossibly magnetic. "Careful," he said, low and measured. "You don't know what you're inviting." But she did. In that moment, she knew she was already drawn into him, into his world, into the dangerous pull of obsession that had begun the instant their eyes met. And even though fear whispered in her ear, her heart answered with equal intensity. She wanted this. She wanted him. The lights of the Christmas party glittered behind them, oblivious to the tension, the quiet, confession of vulnerability, the silent magnetism between predator and prey. And she realized, perhaps too late, that nothing about him, about tonight, would ever be ordinary. Again. The party had reached its peak, glittering lights, laughter, the clinking of glasses, but she no longer felt like part of it. Her thoughts were consumed by him, by the way he had watched her, protected her, and revealed glimpses of something human beneath the storm of danger. And she had no idea just how much he was thinking about her. It started with small things, almost imperceptible. A glance lingering longer than necessary. A hand brushing hers by accident, or maybe not an accident. Each movement calculated, subtle, precise, designed to pull her deeper into his orbit. When she left her gloves behind in the grand hallway, she didn't think much of it. But he noticed. Of course he noticed. He picked them up later, examining the soft leather in his hands as if studying a rare, fragile treasure. The way they smelled faintly of her, the way they were hers and no one else's. It sparked something inside him he hadn't felt in years. He kept them. Not because he needed them, not because it was practical, but because they reminded him of her. Every glance at those gloves was a reminder of her presence, her vulnerability, the quiet pull that had begun the moment they collided at the party. He was obsessed, and he knew it. She, of course, had no idea. To her, he was the enigma, the dangerous man who had saved her, once who had danced with her, who haunted her every thought. But to him, she was already the center of his world. Every detail mattered. Every movement, every glance, every breath she took had been noted, cataloged, and remembered. It wasn't just fascination. It wasn't just attraction. It was claiming. Subtle, silent, unavoidable. Later that evening, he found himself circling back to the grand hall where she had laughed, stumbled and moved through the crowd. She wasn't there now, but the memory of her lingered in every shadow, every corner of the room. The way her hair had caught the light, the nervous tilt of her head, the small curve of her lips when she smiled at nothing in particular. He reached for the gloves again, holding them for a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't normal, he knew it, but neither was she, and he didn't care. Every instinct in his being, honed over years of danger and control, told him to keep her at a distance, to remain untouchable, untangled. But every instinct also screamed in a new, unfamiliar way. She wasn't just someone to watch. She was someone to possess, someone to protect, someone to obsess over. And so the gloves remained in his pocket, a silent, private token of the obsession that was already forming. He didn't need to see her to feel her presence. She was in his thoughts, in his gaze, in the way he moved through the room. And he knew, without question, that the night's events were only the beginning. Obsession doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock politely at the door. It seeps in quietly, imperceptibly, until it dominates everything. And she, unknowingly, had already become his obsession. He wouldn't let her go, not now, not ever. And somewhere deep down, in the part of him he didn't show the world, he knew. She was dangerous. Not because she threatened him, but because she had the power to unravel him. Entirely. The party had begun to wind down. Guests laughed a little less loudly, sipped their final drinks, and whispered goodbyes as carriages and limousines waited outside. She moved carefully, through the thinning crowd, hoping to escape the night with her heart intact. But he was already there, waiting. Not in the main hall, not with a grand announcement, just standing in the shadows of the doorway, calm, poised, impossibly still. The moment their eyes met, her breath caught. The way he looked at her was different this time, less casual, more deliberate, possessive, dangerous. "I'm leaving," she said softly, unsure why she even bothered. "Not yet," he replied, low and measured. His voice carried a weight she couldn't ignore. "There's something you need to see." She frowned, hesitant. "I don't understand." He stepped closer, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. "You don't need to. Just trust me." Her chest tightened. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to vanish, into the night. But curiosity, a dangerous, irresistible curiosity, kept her rooted in place. She had already been drawn into his world, whether she realized it or not, and there was no turning back. He extended his hand, an invitation that felt both gentle and commanding. "Come with me, just for a moment." Her pulse quickened. "Why? Where?" "Somewhere. Private," he said, letting the words linger in the air like a promise and a threat. His dark eyes bore into hers, unyielding. "Somewhere you can understand. Just a little of what I am. A little of me." The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them. She knew she shouldn't. Go. She shouldn't trust him. Every tale whispered at the party. Every hint of danger she had sensed screamed at her to stay away. And yet, she wanted to go. There was something magnetic about him. Something that pulled her closer despite every warning, every rational thought. His controlled presence, his silent obsession, the way he seemed to know her without ever asking. It was intoxicating. Dangerous, yes, but impossible to resist. She began, hesitating, her voice trembling. "Trust me," he said again, softer this time. Not pleading, not commanding, just certain. Certain that she would follow, certain that she would step into the unknown with him. And she did. He led her through a quiet corridor, past rooms glittering with forgotten decorations, past shadows where the party's laughter faded into silence. The air between them was thick with tension, fear, fascination, attraction, and the quiet hum of something forbidden. Every step they took felt like crossing an invisible line, a line she didn't yet understand but could feel deep in her bones. Finally, he stopped in a secluded chamber, dimly lit by flickering candles. The warmth of the room contrasted with the chill in her chest, the anticipation of what was to come. He turned to her, eyes dark, intent, unreadable. "This is," she started, words failing her. "Why are we here?" He tilted his head, studying her, and the faintest smile brushed his lips. "Because you need to see the truth. Because you need to understand that some things, some people change. Everything." The words weren't just an explanation. They were a promise, a warning, an offer. And in that moment she realized, whatever happened next, her life would never be the same. She had accepted the dangerous offer, stepping fully into a world of obsession, power, and forbidden desire. The secluded room was quiet, lit only by the soft flicker of candles. Shadows danced along the walls, mirroring the storm brewing between them. She could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy and unrelenting, as if he were reading every thought she hadn't dared to speak aloud. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Every instinct screamed to step back, to create distance. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when he was this close. His presence like a magnetic force she had no power to resist. He moved toward her, deliberate, controlled, each step measured. The space between them shrank, charged with tension. The slightest brush of his fingers against hers sent a jolt through her body. "You feel that?" he murmured, almost a whisper, low and intoxicating. "This, between us, it's dangerous," she swallowed, words catching in her throat. I shouldn't." "No," he interrupted softly, placing a finger under her chin to lift her gaze to his. "You shouldn't. Fight it, not yet, just feel it." Her heart pounded, caught between fear and desire. His touch was light, almost teasing, but the effect it had on her was anything but gentle. Every nerve ending seemed to ignite under his fingertips. Every instinct screaming that this was forbidden, that this was dangerous, that this was inevitable. He traced a line from her jaw to her shoulder, a movement so deliberate, so intimate, that she felt her knees weaken. Her breath caught, shallow and unsteady. The room seemed to shrink around them, leaving only two people suspended in a charged electric silence. "You're trembling," he said, noting the quiver in her hands, in her lips, in her entire being. "And yet, you're here. I can't stop," she admitted, barely above a whisper. Her voice trembled, betraying her. Curiosity and fascination. She knew it was reckless. She knew it was dangerous. But she wanted this, even if it terrified her. He smiled faintly, dark and knowing, the kind of smile that promised everything and nothing at once. "Good," he murmured, "because once you start, there's no turning back." Then, as if testing the boundaries, he let his hand rest lightly at the small of her back, guiding her slightly closer. Not forceful, not aggressive, but intentional. Every inch of proximity was calculated, deliberate, drawing her into his orbit, tethering her with invisible threads she could neither resist nor understand. Her breath hitched. His closeness, his deliberate restraint, the tension that hummed between them. It was more intoxicating than anything she had ever known. Dangerous, yes, but irresistible. Forbidden, yes, but magnetic. And in that suspended moment, the room seemed to vanish. The music, the laughter, the rest of the party. All irrelevant. There was only him. Only her. Only the electric pull of two souls, teetering on the edge of surrender. Then he leaned slightly, just enough for her to feel the warmth of him brushing against her. His eyes searched hers, dark and unreadable, asking questions she didn't know the answers to, and she realized, with a thrill that made her shiver, he was claiming her, piece by piece, without a single word, without crossing the line, yet leaving her completely under his control. Her hand trembled as it hovered near his chest, unsure if she should retreat or embrace the undeniable connection. The answer was clear, even if her mind tried to resist. She wanted this. She wanted him, and she knew. He already had her in ways she could not yet define. The Christmas party was alive with laughter and music, the kind that hid secrets behind its cheerful facade. Guests mingled, glasses clinked, and no one noticed the subtle shift in the air. No one except her. She had just stepped back onto the dance floor, trying to compose herself after their intimate moment in the hallway. Her pulse was still racing, her thoughts tangled with the dangerous pull. He had over her, and then he appeared. Not in the shadows this time. Not quietly. He moved with a presence that demanded attention, slicing through the crowd like a blade. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and whispers began. The same whispers she had overheard earlier, about his power, his fearsome reputation. But this time, they were punctuated with awe and shock. He approached her, slow and deliberate, each step measured. She felt every eye on them, yet all she could focus on was him. His dark gaze locked onto hers, and the intensity made her shiver. Without a word, he extended a hand. A simple gesture, but in his world it carried weight. Possession, claim. She hesitated, heart hammering, aware of the crowd around them. Every instinct screamed to resist, to pull back, but she found she couldn't. Not with him, not now. He guided her to the center of the ballroom, where the light seemed to spotlight them, leaving everything else in shadow. The murmurs grew louder. Heads turned, eyes widened. Everyone knew who he was, and everyone understood, without a word spoken, that she belonged to him. He leaned slightly toward her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. "This is yours now," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. Not a command, not a question, a declaration. The room seemed to hold its breath. People watched, frozen, as the Mafia boss claimed her in, the most subtle yet undeniable way. The faint brush of his fingers along hers, the quiet tilt of his head, the intensity of his gaze, it left no doubt. Her heart raced, trapped between fear and exhilaration. She could feel the eyes of the entire ballroom on her, and yet none of it mattered. Not the whispers, not the stares, not the reputation of the man who had made her his obsession. He let her hand rest lightly in his, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The dangerous calm in his presence, the quiet power he radiated, it consumed her. She realized, with a thrill that left her breathless, that she had already surrendered. Not physically, not completely, but in a way far more profound. "Do you understand?" he whispered, almost to himself, almost a warning. "Once I claim you, everything changes, forever." She nodded, unable to speak, caught between fear, fascination, and something deeper. The world around them blurred. The lights, the music, the laughter. It all became background to the undeniable fact she was his, and the crowd saw it. Whispers erupted, speculation and awe mixing into a roar of unspoken acknowledgement. He had made it clear, she was not just anyone. She was his obsession, his possession. As he finally stepped back, letting her catch her breath, the tension didn't fade. It lingered, thick and electric, leaving her dizzy, trembling, and yet completely enthralled. She realized with a thrill she couldn't deny that nothing would ever be ordinary again. The Christmas lights glittered overhead, casting long shadows across the room, shadows that now belonged to them both. And somewhere deep down she understood. The public claim was only the beginning. The obsession, the danger, the desire, it had only just begun. The echoes of the party faded behind them as he led her away from the ballroom, through quiet corridors where the festive laughter could no longer reach. Here, in the shadows of the mansion, the world shrank until it was just the two of them. She tried to steady her racing heart. The public claim, the crowd, the whispers, they still reverberated through her mind. But he didn't leave her any room to dwell on them. He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. The dim candlelight cast sharp shadows across his face, highlighting the dangerous intensity in his dark eyes. His presence was overwhelming, commanding and utterly magnetic. "You're thinking about them," he said softly, almost accusingly. "About the whispers, the stares, the rumors?" She swallowed, unsure how to respond. I just didn't expect it," she admitted, voice trembling. "Everyone watching. It's overwhelming." He stepped closer, closing the distance until the warmth of him enveloped her. "And yet, You stayed, even when you could have left. His voice was low, controlled, but underneath there was an edge of something she couldn't quite name. Possessiveness, desire, obsession. She looked into his eyes, searching for answers. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why now?" He tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Because I don't let go. Once I notice someone, I don't forget. I don't ignore. And I certainly don't walk away." Her chest tightened. Every word, every glance, every subtle movement of his was a claim. And yet there was vulnerability in it too. A glimpse of the man beneath the dangerous exterior, the one who had watched her all night, catalogued her every move, and found himself drawn to her in ways he didn't fully understand. "I don't know if I can," she began, but he cut her off gently, placing a finger under her chin to lift her gaze to his. "You can," he said softly, but with undeniable authority, "because you already have. You're already in my world, whether you admit it or not." Her breath hitched. The honesty in his eyes, the dangerous sincerity, left her trembling. She wanted to resist, to retreat, but she couldn't. Not from him. Not now. He closed the last of the distance between them, letting his hand rest lightly on her shoulder. It wasn't just a touch. It was a promise, a claim, a subtle warning. His gaze locked onto hers, intense and unyielding, and she felt the weight of everything between them. Desire, obsession, danger, and an undeniable connection that neither could ignore. "Do you understand?" he murmured, voice low, intimate, impossible to resist. Us. It's dangerous, but it's real. And once it begins, there's no turning back." She nodded, unable to speak, her chest tight with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She realized in that quiet, shadowed moment that she had already crossed the line. She was entwined in his world, in his obsession, in a dangerous romance that promised both ecstasy and peril. He studied her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch, heavy with unspoken words. Then, almost reluctantly, he stepped back. Not fully, just enough to give her room, but not enough to release the tension that crackled between them. And in that moment she knew the truth. He was dangerous, irresistible, and utterly consumed by her. And she was already his. The shadows of the corridor seemed to press in around them, thick with promise, danger, and desire. And as they lingered there, in the quiet after the storm of the party, one thing was clear. Their story had only just begun. The quiet of the mansion after the party was deceptive. Shadows stretched long across the walls, and the faint echoes of laughter had long since faded. Yet the danger had not. It was waiting, silent, patient, and far more real than the glittering lights and festive cheer. She was alone for a moment, gathering herself in a secluded room, when the first sign appeared. A note slipped under the door, small and unassuming, but carrying a threat that made her blood run cold. "Stay away from him or you'll regret it." Her fingers trembled as she read it, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed fear. This wasn't a game. Someone had noticed her. Someone had noticed them. And now, for the first time, she felt the stakes of her connection with him, the pull she couldn't resist, the obsession she was already caught in and turned sharply dangerous. Before she could think, the room grew cold with his presence. He was there, as always, silent, looming, a shadow cast by something stronger than any ordinary man. His dark eyes scanned her face, immediately understanding the fear that gripped her. "They've noticed," she whispered, voice shaking. Someone knows." His jaw tightened imperceptibly. "They'll regret it," he said, calm but deadly. "No one threatens." "What's mine?" She looked at him, a mixture of awe and terror in her gaze. "But it's dangerous. Why can't I stay out of it?" He stepped closer, and the warmth radiating from him contrasted sharply with the chill of the threat. Because danger doesn't wait for consent, he said quietly. And neither do I. Every word, every movement, every subtle shift in his posture screamed ownership, obsession, and unyielding power. She realized with a shiver that she was not just caught in his world. She was entwined in his life, his mind, and his unspoken code of protection. He handed her a small, sleek phone, one she had never seen before. "This," he said, his voice low, "is for you. If anyone tries to cross you, anyone even thinks about it, you call me. I will find them. I will make them disappear." Her breath caught. The intensity of his obsession, of his need to protect her, was terrifying. And yet, it was exhilarating. She felt trapped and exhilarated in the same heartbeat, caught between fear and fascination. "Why me?" she asked softly, almost unable to speak. "Why go to such lengths?" He reached out, lightly brushing a strand of hair from her face, and the touch sent a shock through her body. "Because I don't share. Because I don't let anyone touch what I claim. And because you're mine now." The words weren't just possessive. They were a promise, a warning, an obsession that would not be denied. She felt the weight of it settle around her, binding her in ways she didn't yet understand, yet couldn't escape. And then, as if sensing the storm outside the room, he stepped back slightly, allowing her a breath, a moment to absorb the reality of her new world. A world where danger was constant, where obsession and power intertwined, and where her life had irrevocably changed. She realized in that quiet, tense moment that nothing would ever be simple again. Every step, every glance, every heartbeat would now exist in the shadow of him, of his protection, and of the dangerous obsession that had claimed her. The threat outside was real, but the greater danger and the greater pull was the man standing in front of her. And she already knew. She didn't want to escape him. The mansion was quiet now. The party had ended, the lights dimmed, leaving only flickering shadows along the grand walls. The air smelled faintly of pine, candle wax, and the lingering tension of the night. She stood by a window, looking out at the city lights below, her thoughts tangled with everything that had happened. He appeared beside her, silent as always. No grand gestures, no announcements, just him. The darkness clung to him like a second skin, but there was a gentleness here too, rare and fleeting, reserved for her alone. "You've changed tonight," he said softly, voice low, measured, almost contemplative. "Everything has shifted. And you—" His gaze swept over her, intense, possessive. "You're no longer just a guest in my world." She shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of his words. Every glance, every gesture, every subtle action he had taken tonight, from the protective presence on the dance floor to the public claim in the ballroom and the private confrontation in the shadows, had left marks she couldn't ignore. Marks that tied her to him in ways she didn't yet understand. "Am I safe?" she whispered, almost afraid to ask. "Safe?" His lips curved faintly, almost a smile. "Safe is not a word in my world. But—" He paused, letting the meaning sink in. "You're protected. By me. And I will not let anyone take what I claim." Her chest tightened. The thrill of danger and the pull of obsession had become inseparable. Fear, fascination, and desire danced together in her veins. And she realized that she had surrendered, if not fully, then enough for him to claim her. Enough for her to feel the weight of his obsession and the inescapable gravity of his power. He leaned slightly closer, his presence pressing against her like a promise. "You are mine," he murmured, almost to himself. Yet the words carried through the stillness, echoing in her mind. Mine to protect, mine to desire, mine to obsess over. She looked at him, and for the first time, she saw beyond the dangerous, untouchable exterior. She saw a man who was entirely consumed by her, obsessed, relentless, and yet, profoundly, human in ways no one else would ever witness. And in that revelation, fear and longing merged into something dangerous, irresistible. The night stretched on, long and heavy with unspoken confessions. And she understood, finally, that the world she had known, ordinary, safe, predictable, was gone, replaced by a life of obsession, power, and forbidden love. A life in which every glance, every touch, every shadow carried risk and exhilaration. She felt the weight of destiny pressing on her chest, dark yet inevitable. And somewhere deep within, she realized that surrender was no longer a choice. She had been claimed, and in that claim lay both danger and an unparalleled intensity of feeling. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, the touch firm yet intimate, and whispered, "Faith in destiny, faith in fate, faith in what we are to each other." The city lights glimmered below, insignificant against the storm they had ignited between them. And she allowed herself to breathe, finally understanding that the obsession, the danger, and the dark romance that had begun with one accidental bump at a Christmas party would define her world and her heart forever. The night held them in its shadows, but for once, she didn't want to escape, because some fates, no matter how dangerous, were impossible to resist. As the shadows of the night settle over the mansion, remember, some fates are impossible to resist. Some desires are as dangerous as they are irresistible, and some stories are just beginning even when the world thinks they've ended. If you felt the thrill of forbidden attraction, the pull of obsession, and the fire of a love that defies everything, don't miss a single twist of this dark romance. Subscribe now and follow every heartbeat, every secret, and every shadowed moment in this story. Because in this world of power, danger, and soul-deep love, every chapter demands your attention, and every love story hides a secret waiting to be claimed. Stay with us. The darkness has only just begun.